Crazy People is about an ad man, Dudley Moore. His character's name is Emery Leeson, who is beginning to have a mental breakdown. He feels like he's lying in his job all the time, so he decides to write truth in advertising. And so, like, an example of a couple of his ads would be Volvo, boxy but good. We know they're not sexy, but boxy but good. Or Quaker Oats. Is the cereal good? We don't know, but at least the box is cute. So all of these ads are written up, and his boss sends him to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation and treatment, and mistakenly all of his ads go out to print, and they are a huge success. He falls in love with Kathy, who is played by Daryl Hannah, at the psychiatric hospital, meets some new friends there, does not want to leave the hospital, and all of the folks there begin to write ads with him. So it's a very, very cute, very engaging movie, and the ads are hysterical.
When they found out that they were filming a pretty major motion picture with a very major star, I mean,
Right.
Dudley Moore's just coming off of Arthur. It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
What did that do to the Roanoke creative community?
I think it excited them because Paramount Pictures, this is the big league, and they use so many different locations here. So it had been quite a long time since anything major had been made in this area. So folks were quite happy to be involved.
Ooh, I have to do that one again.
That's all right.
Sorry. Gonna have to start the silence phones on the set.
Hey, I was looking on YouTube, and Todd, and a lot of the ads are on there. Like the ad, the one that I'm in.
Yeah.
I mean, all of them are posted as separate little clips. I don't know if you need that, but it's kind of fun.
We're still rolling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's just do that again.
Okay.
Tell me what it was like in Roanoke when they found out a big motion picture with a big star was going to be coming to town.
It was major excitement because Paramount Pictures, I mean, it's huge. And several different locations were used. A lot of local people were used, some with lines, some as extras. But it was nice to be recognized in this part of the world, to have some assets, for filmmaking.
What? Tell me about your.
Hold that thought. I'm sorry.
Thought is being held.
I thought.
I never notice these things until I start rolling, so.
It's okay. I work in the biz. It's no big deal.
We're still rolling.
Okay.
Tell me about how you ended up in the film.
A complete fluke. I was at the.
Can you start with saying the way I ended up in
Oh, okay. You want to do the complete?
Because
Okay.
you're not gonna hear Todd.
Right. Okay. The way that I ended up in the film is just good luck. I was at the scene at the Grandin Theater. It was a large scene which involved a lot of moviegoers, and I was asked by Mark Fincannon, who was doing some of the casting, to come back to a smaller scene the next day. And so I went to that smaller scene. It was for a call center scene with operators taking calls for a product called VitaFlex diet program. The first 2 seats in the scene were cast with lines, and suddenly the director came up to me and said, "Can you say, 'I don't know about the plant, sir, please hold'?" And I assured him that I could say that consecutively. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, that's how I ended up with the line. I went from being an extra to a day player that day.
What was the experience like?
It was great. It was a little nerve-wracking because I knew having a line in a SAG-eligible picture was a big deal. I made $414 for my one line and received royalties for about a good 8 years after the picture was released. I also got to meet Dudley Moore and just met some really great people.
What made the Grandin shoot such an interesting thing?
Okay, the Grandin shoot was interesting because the Grandin Theater was used as a movie theater promoting a film by Paramount Pictures. Let me try again.
Can you sit back a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
You look like you moved compared
Okay.
to where you were before.
Sorry.
And my focus. Stand by my
Yep.
focus.
I'll stay right here.
Look at Todd.
Garrett.
All right. Take it when you're ready.
The Grandin Theater was being used for a movie theater in the film, and the marquee was very interesting. When I first arrived at the Grandin, I noticed that it had been covered up, and I wondered why. There were several hundred people there. When they unveiled it, the marquee shared that the movie was called The Freak, and the tagline was, "This movie will not only scare you, it will blank you up for life." So there was a few concerns about having that on the marquee, and I think a lot of folks were a little shocked when the covering came down.
All in all, what did you think of the experience? The whole thing. What was the experience like for you?
The experience was very fun and very exciting. Again, I went from an extra to someone who had a line. It was great to see someone like Paramount Pictures behind the scene do what they do. Everybody on the set was great. I hope that those type of projects come to this area lots of times.
Do you think the importance of having an active, creative community in a town the size of Roanoke is?
The importance is that it's unique. Because of our size, I feel that we can be more personal and that we have so many talented people here in the Roanoke Valley. It's not that we lack the talent. I think we somewhat lack the exposure. And once folks come here to film or do television, they realize what a gem we are.
Okay, I'm Frida Smith, formerly known as Frida Carper.
I'll never get Smith right.
I know, nobody will.
Yeah. That's one of the interesting. Well, let's just start out a little bit with you. What interested you about the whole marketing, advertising, communications field in the first place? How'd you get into it? What?
Well, I started out early in my career in the hospitality industry, and I was in sales and marketing for the hospitality industry back in the mid-'70s. And when I left Roanoke, which was for a very short period of time, I actually moved to Pikeville, Kentucky. And when I went to Pikeville, Kentucky, the bank, Pikeville National, was actually looking for a marketing director. And I sort of went in, bluffed my way a little bit, raised my hand and said, I think I can do this. And so they hired me as the marketing director for the bank there in Pikeville, Kentucky. And so that's really how I got my start in bank marketing and advertising and public relations, and that was back in 1980. And then I returned to Roanoke in 1984 and went to work for First Federal Savings and Loan in 1985 as their marketing director. That was the point that we were actually looking for an advertising agency. And in Roanoke, there were a number of really great agencies. And we started, just getting out there and asking people to come in and do their bids, and surprised at the great talent that was actually presented to us. And that's when I started working with Associated Advertising as the agency for First Federal Savings and Loan at that point in time.
You were saying that what was your first job with First Federal? What was the first thing they asked you to do?
The first thing that they asked me to do at First Federal was to find a new agency. They had been with agency for forever and a day, and the management was just so closely tied to them that they could not tell them that they didn't want to work with them any longer. They needed a new person to come in and go out and make that happen.
Tell me about what campaigns do you particularly remember in Roanoke that you found particularly impactful, insightful, fun?
Well, I can tell you about the ones that we did, especially there with First Federal and then with Corey's, and you may even remember some of those yourself. But I guess one of the fun ones we did was the Good Things Happen when we get together. And there was a lot of good work, put into that. And actually, that's when Associated Advertising had to rebid with First Federal, which became Core East, and they were up against a statewide agency, not just the ones locally, but some other agencies around the state as well. And when they presented Good Things Happen, it just sort of blew everybody out of the water, and it was fun, and it was a fun campaign. Now, when I think about growing up in the Valley, you have to always remember, I guess, about the pigs and Valleydale. I guess that's the one thing, that really comes to mind. And I guess some of the other things, because I was trying to think, some of the other things I remember as a kid, of course, the old Clover Creamery and their design, and always going to the creameries and having some fun there and everything. But a lot of good things around that happened.
Can you sing the Valleydale jingle?
No.
I'll tell you, I will go to my grave singing "Good Things Happen When We Get
Yes.
Together."
And actually, it was just recently that there was another company, I can't think of who it was, did Good Things Happen When We Get Together on TV. And I immediately called Jim Webster and said, Jim, you're not going to believe this. Somebody's taken our slogan.
Tell me about your involvement with AdFed.
Well, in 1986, I was the AdFed president locally, and I did that. And then I was ADDI chair, I want to say, in the late 80s, or maybe early 90s. And I was talking to Dave a little bit earlier, and we were talking about how I guess when we did the Addies that particular year when I was ADDI chair, was probably one of the first years that we did it at Mill Mountain Theater. As a matter of fact, it was the first year that we did it at Mill Mountain Theater. And we actually had the group out of Virginia Tech that came down, and I think the theme was Nobody Does It Better. And I just remember it was New Virginians, and they did their song and dance routine, and it was an awesome event. But so many people spent so much time back in those days putting the events together because they were huge. They were absolutely huge. The year after that, Ben Javaden did the show, and it was called The Heat Is On. And I just remember, so distinctly everybody working so hard and putting all the pieces together that had to come together to make it happen.
Oh yeah, I remember there were years that I'd be the stage manager, and Webster's up in the box.
That's right. I mean, they were huge productions, and today they may be the same, but I think then so much went into each piece of it, and the rehearsals that had to go on, and everybody just being. I mean, it was a huge stage production.
How have you seen things change over the last 20, 30 years?
Well, I think the biggest change, especially in this particular area, is probably away from a lot of the bigger agencies. And I think you just have a lot of freelancers now, or smaller agencies doing a lot of different things. I think between the digital technology that has come to play in the advertising field, that a lot of things have changed. If you remember the old Associated Advertising, and you had Julie McDowell, and she's back there, pressing, type to do the invitations and the different types of things that she did. But that's what she did, and she was perfectionist at it. And we've now gone away from that because everything, is pretty much computerized at this point in time.
What was the difference in the process?
Well, I guess at that point in time, of course, you sit down and you actually brainstorm what the idea is going to be, and then the team comes together, they start putting all the pieces, you do the selection on the photography, or you shoot the photography. If it's print, then, the type is looked at, you select the type, it's pressed, it's just everything just took time and time again. And looking at the proofs, I mean, how many proofs did you look at before something ever actually got printed? I mean, it was not a here today project. It was like it went on for weeks. I mean, weeks before you probably actually saw something that you wanted produced actually produced. That's the other thing, I guess, with today's society. Everybody wants everything now, and back then, we had to wait a little time. When I was at Pikeville National, the interesting thing there is that I had to wait on a bus. I couldn't even get UPS coming into Pikeville, Kentucky, that if I wanted something the next day, it had to come in on the Greyhound bus. And that's the type of situation that we were in then, is that, it just wasn't going to happen overnight.
Yeah,
We didn't have the faxes. We didn't have the email. We didn't have all of that where you could, scan and send a document to look and everything. You had to physically deliver it and make it happen.
Tell me about John Will Creasy, what you thought of him, what kind of figure he was.
John Will Creasy was a wonderful, wonderful man. And I probably learned as much from John Will Creasy as anyone. And the thing about John Will, not only was he creative when it comes to just advertising, but he was creative when it came to events. I so remember setting up events, and I remember the big one we did at the Hotel Roanoke. I physically had someone make a pond that would fit on an 8-foot table because that's what he wanted. That's what he wanted, to put floral arrangements. He wanted Swan Lake is what he wanted. So not only did I have this pond made that fit on the table, I then had to go find water lilies in the middle of the wintertime. And there's only one place in Roanoke that you could find back in the, I guess this was the late 80s, and that was a pond behind the Pepsi bottling center. And there were water lilies out there that we went and harvested to put in his Swan Lake. Ed Murphy, who was a caterer back then, had a swan, frozen swan, and we placed that in the lake along with everything else. But he was just a perfectionist when it came to doing those types of things. Nothing was too out of the world. I mean, he just really, whatever he could dream of, we could put it together.
I still remember screwing together those felt panels.
Oh yeah.
He could turn anywhere into a venue. By
Yes.
just putting together the,
Yes, we carried them. I had those felt panels for 10 years, and we stored them. And I remember, I guess it was with the Crestar at the point in time, because they went from blue when we had them for First Federal. Then when I went to work for Crestar, they followed me, and the panels became orange after that. And we used them time and time again for shows that we did. And then there was the metallic curtain. I don't know if you remember the silver draped curtain that we used for all the different shows that we did. But it just kept getting recycled over and over again.
What do you think? Do you have any idea of why women have found opportunity in Roanoke at times that there was a lot going on about the glass ceiling and that kind of thing?
Well, once again, I think, everyone's individual, but I think, there were a number of us that wanted to step up and we wanted to do more. And I think that we had some mentors along the way. And those folks helped us to get to where we wanted to be. And in many cases, we made a lot of sacrifices, but that was okay because that's what we wanted to do. It was our generation to make those things happen. And I think that's what we wanted to do.
Can you phrase that so that we know you're talking about women?
There have been a lot of women who have taken prominent roles in Roanoke advertising because. Just started with something.
Okay. There have been a lot of women in Roanoke that have taken some leadership roles, and I think back during the 80s and the 90s, I know that Judy Perfader came right after me as AdFed president. There was Clara Maddox, as you talked about, and a number of other folks that came along. But I think, we had a lot of great mentors. And that was the key to the whole thing. People that wanted to help us to achieve, and then our generation wanting to achieve. I think that we came up that way. And a lot of us, we weren't going to accept anything except a leadership position.
What people have you met through advertising that you've particularly admired or particularly gotten close relationships with?
Well, I think a lot of the folks, as at the old Associated Advertising, I was very close with. I know John Will Creasy, just a star of a gentleman. I've learned so much from him, whether it was doing idiot work or events or just putting that little extra special thing to make things sparkle. Jim Webster, just a very, very creative mind, and I know that you've worked with him, many different ways. Howard Packett, been around for a long time, and Howard, just knowing him and knowing a lot of the things that he's done and how he ran his business. Then Richard Boyd. I spent a lot of time with Richard Boyd over the years in photography, and I have a lot of funny stories about Richard as well. But just knowing him and seeing him grow as time has gone on as well. But, just a lot of folks in Roanoke that I think, whether they're here now or gone, probably helped in where I became in advertising. Mark Mulholland was AdFed president before I was. Judy Perfader, I think, was after. But Mark was very creative, and I know that Mark and I spent some time doing 3rd District together as well as just doing Roanoke advertising.
Tell me, what did you think, and how did you feel about what I consider a grand honor of being named a silver medal winner? Or silver medal recipient. Winner is not really the right word. It's a recognition.
Silver medal to me is probably the greatest thing that I ever received. I chuckle from time to time because I tell folks, I said, I have 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards and I'm still alive. I said, I don't know if that's the way it's supposed to be. But when I received the silver medal, first off, it was a complete surprise. But I was just very humbled to be recognized in that way, not only for what I guess I had given to the Roanoke advertising community, but just the community in general. Because the advertising group here in Roanoke, they do a lot of community work. But I personally feel like that's a big part of what everybody should do. And I've always done that. So I'm actively involved in a lot of different boards and things and have helped them in some advertising and been able to get some folks to help them, to come in. Through my connections, I've been able to help them to get some advertising that helped them in their nonprofit world.
What do you think the value is of having a strong creative community in a city the size of Roanoke?
Oh, it's very important. It's very important just for the businesses that are here, but again, it's important for the community because I think if you see just some of the TV spots that are run for nonprofits or for profit businesses as well.
A city the size of Roanoke.
Oh, it's very important. It's very important just for the businesses that are here, but again, it's important for the community because I think if you see just some of the TV spots that are run for nonprofits or for profit businesses as well, and a lot of them stand out with the national advertising that's done. I mean, there's some very, very good work that actually starts here in Roanoke, Virginia.
Actually, that's something that I also wanted to visit with you about. I mean, in your capacity, you've had a lot of opportunities to work with a lot of people literally around the country.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel the quality of work and the quality of professionalism in Roanoke compared to the quality of people in bigger markets? I mean, it's often a city of Roanoke size is a stepping stone to a bigger market. There are a lot of us who come and stay and are glad to stay.
And I'm glad you stayed. The reason being because I think the creative in Roanoke is probably as good as anywhere it gets. You can go to a large city and you may have more people that are creative, but I think in Roanoke you have just as creative folks. Maybe not as many, but just as creative. And I think some of the work that has come out of Roanoke shows that.
You just do great. You've been do you have, what is the funniest, weirdest, or wackiest thing you ever saw happen related to advertising or advertising people?
One of the funniest stories I will tell, and this is on Richard Boyd. He'd kill me, I'm sure. But in 1987, we were down in Knoxville, Tennessee, shooting some spots with Ken Maxwell. I know that Associated Advertising used Ken Maxwell on a number of shoots. And it just happened to be when the stock market crashed. I thought Richard was going to die 1,000 deaths, and he wouldn't shut up. Every time we got together, for every shot, for every dinner, every breakfast, the market has crashed. Are we going to live? Are we going to survive? I said, Richard, shut up before we kill you. That was really a funny time that we had.
I remember that. I remember you coming in the office saying that your IRA was worth half today of what it was yesterday.
Yes,
I think we've crashed 3 or 4 times.
It was
since
sad.
then.
It was sad. Then I remember one time that for 3rd District we were down in Greenville, South Carolina, And as you know, sometimes those events can get a little wild and crazy. And I remember that was the night that Jim Webster and I wrapped the entire room in toilet paper. Don't ask me why, but we did.
Seemed like a good idea at the
It
time.
was a good time. Yes, it was a fun time to say the least.
Yeah. What do you see? What is the difference in the market from a few years ago to today, and how do you see us going forward?
The market itself.
Yeah, the Roanoke Valley, larger Roanoke Valley.
From a client standpoint, I think the unfortunate side, what we see today, is that a lot of companies have probably cut back on their advertising dollars, and they don't spend like they used to. And when they do spend, in many cases, they're using the smaller companies or freelancers, or they're really shopping to see what they can get for their advertising dollar, which I think is unfortunate. Because I think back in the days when we had an agency that you could work with full-time, they knew you, they knew what you were looking for, and you could sit down, you could really brainstorm with them, and you could really come up with those campaigns that really, really made a difference. I don't see that as much today. I don't see the involvement of a lot of folks in that type of thing as I did before.
We were talking. I was talking with Tommy or somebody, and I remember when it was a big deal that Leatherhouse was going to change agencies.
Yes.
Leatherhouse is still here. I'll bet I spend more. I'll bet I spend more on gas in my car than they do in advertising. a year.
Probably, which is sad to see, because of course, advertising is the name of the game, and that's what my license plate says today. I got my license plate in 1986. It says advertise, and I have yet to change it.
That's great. You've talked about everything that I wanted to talk about.
Okay, good.
Hey, Dave. I know this isn't the norm, but could you grab the camera and just do a quick pan of Frida's license plate?
Sure.
That would be great.
Yeah.
We're going to sit here in the warm and talk about it while you go out and do
Yeah.
it. It's advertised.
He saw
Microphone on the
he
cover.
walked in.
Okay, we're rolling.
Yeah. Tell me about the event, the premiere event, or not premiere. I guess it was a cast party.
It was a cast party that we did for Crazy People. And we had all of the folks there from the bank because it was going to be a big deal. We had Dudley Moore coming and the other cast members. And we were doing it in the parking garage. And the torrential rains came, and it rained, and it rained. So we moved from the top of the parking garage down a couple of floors so that the band wouldn't get electrocuted. But the funniest part was that Dudley Moore comes out, and he is so intoxicated that he's being carried by two people, bodyguards on each side, so that everybody could see him, because this was the key thing that everybody wanted to come and see, and they're just carrying him around. It was an unbelievable event, but a good time was had by all.